Hello and welcome to the ISBA Animal Law Sections podcast entitled Your Not So Friendly Neighborhood Cat, How Communities Can Better Address Ferals. My name is Anna Morrison-Riccardotti and I practice civil litigation in animal law here in Chicago, Illinois. And I'll be introducing today's speakers, attorneys Lisa Velez and Richard Angelo, who will be addressing the feral cat issues arising on a local, state, and national level in the United States. As many of our listeners likely already know, feral cats, through no fault of their own, often live in small colonies outdoors with little or no human contact. Their existence as ferals may be due to human abandonment or having been part of an unsocialized litter of kittens born to an unsterilized mother cat. Over the years, efforts have increased to help this population of outdoor cats, but not without controversy. Our first speaker, Lisa Velez, will be addressing some of the myths about feral cats, along with local and state ordinances impacting feral cat caretakers in Illinois. Lisa Velez is a partner in the Cassidy-Shade firm's Chicago office. She concentrates her practice in the areas of medical malpractice, pharmacy liability, and professional liability. She represents hospitals and physicians involving various medical specialties, and in addition, Lisa Velez sits on Cassidy-Shade's hiring committee, and she is a member of the firm's diversity committee. Lisa received her JD from the University of California, Los Angeles School of Law, and Lisa is an active member of her community, currently a member of the board of directors for Save a Pet Adoption Center, and she previously served as a volunteer counselor at a Safe Place domestic violence shelter. And she has 2 birds, 2 cats, and 2 dogs, as well as being a feral cat colony manager with 13 colony cats. Our second speaker, Richard Angelo, will be addressing feral cat programs, including those in other states, legal issues surrounding these programs, and their impact on feral cat communities. Richard Angelo is a legislative attorney for Best Friends Animal Society. His primary focus is on Best Friends' work with community cats and promoting legislation that will humanely and directly reduce the killing of cats in shelters across the country. He was previously a sole practitioner with an office in Davison, Michigan, focusing on companion animal-related matters and litigation, including defending dangerous dogs, consulting on alternatives to breed-specific legislation, ownership disputes of companion animals, zoning, and ordinance violations regarding companion animals. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Lisa to discuss the local and state matters.
Hi, everyone. This is Lisa, and I'm going to be talking about community cats in Illinois. As Anna mentioned, I guess a good place to start would be to sort of define what a feral cat is. And if we look at the ordinance that sets this forth in Cook County, it's called the Managed Care of Feral Cats Ordinance. A definition of a feral cat is one that's born in the wild or the offspring of an owned or feral cat and not socialized. 2 is a formerly owned cat that has been abandoned and is no longer socialized. Or 3 lives on a farm. Anna has mentioned some of the controversies concerning community cats in Illinois, and I guess that's just probably a good place to start if we just want to, discuss the state of how things are going in Illinois. I guess a good point is, are feral cats owned? And here, a person who decides to, adopt a cat, buy a cat, although we recommend adoption, rescue a cat, or something like that, is the owner of the cat and responsible for providing adequate food, shelter, and water for the cat. However, a person who provides food, water, and shelter to a homeless cat or a community cat and ensures that the cat does not reproduce is a caretaker. Community cats are microchipped, but microchipping does not indicate ownership. It's just instead a method to ensure that the cat is returned to its colony. One would think that there wouldn't be a huge controversy regarding community cats since there are so many cats sharing our homes. However, there are some myths about community cats out there, and so some of the myths that people who are sharing their homes with cats might not be aware of are things like feeding a homeless cat will, increase or draw more cats. But feeding cats does not create homelessness in other cats. It just alleviates the suffering and foraging caused by lack of food. Another myth would be that homeless cats are unhealthy or dirty, and that similarly is not true. The cats that you see are survivors. So the weak, the old, the very young, they've already died from predators, malnutrition, or other elemental exposure. Another myth that you see or hear about community cats are that these cats spread rabies. However, cats are not considered a rabies threat. The CDC rabies surveillance data reveals that there hasn't been a confirmed case of rabies transmission from a cat to a human in over 30 years. Another myth is that these cats belong in animal shelters. However, oftentimes community cats or ferals are they're unadoptable, and they would just end up being killed at shelters. Another myth would be to just take these cats and turn them loose or set them in a barn. And when you relocate community cats, they try to return to their colonies, so that means that a lot of them end up getting killed in the process. And there's also simply not enough barns to house all the displaced cats. Probably the biggest myth, I guess, out there would be the predation myth, where cats are being scapegoated for threatening wildlife and birds, when in actuality the real culprits are man-made, such as pollution, habitat destruction, climate change. People are the biggest contributors to death of birds. Other real problems for birds include loss of habitat, urbanization, pollution, environmental degradation, climate change, wetland habitat loss, collisions with windows and collisions with buildings, automobiles, pesticides that are on crops or applied to golf courses or lawns. These are all things that are killing birds by the millions. So luckily here in Illinois, we have TNR, trap, neuter, return, which is legal, and counties in Illinois have the ability to regulate animal control related matters. As I mentioned earlier, in Cook County there is an ordinance that allows TNR and sets forth a variety of provisions, and so one of the things I wanted to talk about is this ordinance. It's called the Managed Care of Feral Cats Ordinance, and it was passed in October of 2007. It's in place in Cook County, and the ordinance sets forth a variety of things, including some definitions of, for example, feral cat, which I mentioned earlier. Also, what a feral cat caretaker is, which is any person other than an owner who provides food, water, and shelter, and that's found in Section 10-95. Other definitions that are set forth in Section 10-95 include a definition of a feral cat colony, which is a group of cats that congregate as a unit. A feral cat colony caretaker, which is any person approved by a sponsor to care for a feral cat colony. And the sponsor is any animal humane organization that agrees to comply with the requirements of the ordinance. Stray cat is a cat who is regularly off the property of the owner, is not under physical control of the owner, and is not regularly provided food by its owner. With regards to TNR, again, it stands for trap, neuter, return, not release. And it's a program that's formalized pursuant to the ordinance whereby ferals and stray cats are trapped, sterilized, vaccinated, microchipped, and returned to their colonies.
What's the importance of the return versus the release? Because I know that's come up a lot, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Lisa, but it is one of the big issues, I guess, that comes up, because people do say we need to focus TNR as return, not release. And I just wondered if that was your experience as well, that people didn't understand you can't just let them go anywhere. They really do have an established colony.
Right. They're going to try to return to their spot, sort of their turf, their territory, and if they're not there, it's just going to create a vacuum effect. Others are going to move in to try to fill that vacancy.
Right. So the same principle of why trap kill doesn't work. If you just take out the cats in a colony, there's an area that clearly is enough to support the cats, and they'll simply come back. Whereas if they have that colony and they are, trapped and neutered, they can defend that area, they can establish that themselves, and then over time those numbers can decrease, at least in a monitored environment. But no, I just wanted to bring that up because it is a big issue. A lot of people don't understand the importance of the return versus release.
Thank you. All right, Anna, just going back, everyone, to our definitions here with regards to the feral cat colonies and sort of what was being asked about. Feral cat colonies and the colony caretakers are allowed to care for them under the Cook County ordinance. And there are a lot of things that are set forth to make sure that this is a working program. So sponsors must approve the caretakers. They must resolve complaints. They must maintain records. They must provide caretaker training. They must report annually. They must protect wildlife, land from feral cats, and report non-complying caretakers. That sort of also encompasses making sure that any nuisances that would be, created are also handled at that level. The caretaker responsibilities include trapping, registering, feeding, vaccinating, sterilizing, microchipping, and ear tipping the colony. So if you guys see a cat out there with a little clipped left ear, that means it's part of a managed colony. So leave them be where they are. They're where they need to be. Caretakers are responsible for providing shelter, addressing any medical issues, and obtaining permission if feeding on private property, removing kittens, and making a good faith effort to resolve nuisance issues, and reporting biannually to the sponsor. If a caretaker is unable or unwilling to care for the colony, then they must notify the sponsoring agency 60 days in advance, and the sponsor has 30 days to find a replacement before notifying the Department of Ag. And in Cook County, there are a lot of various agencies or sponsoring agencies that are involved in doing this. And so if anyone is interested, some of the sponsoring agencies include Treehouse, Paws Chicago, Triple R Pets, Cat Vando, Feral Feline Project, PACT, and Animal Care League. We can make those resources available as far as their contact information.
And I know just as a quick point, Leedy had asked us to kind of mention. After that quick break, I just wanted to make a quick note that you mentioned the Department of Ag and notifications to the Department of Ag, and that's important because it is the Department of Ag and not the Department of Natural Resources that handles, or that is, is administering these laws that impact the feral cats on a state level. So that is important to keep in mind because, as you'll probably hear maybe more from Richard about some of the controversies regarding feral cats, one comes from the avian community, which it's a little unfortunate because all of our goals are the same, really to ultimately reduce the numbers of outdoor cats. But you'll hear probably a bit more about that later. But it is important to know that Department of Ag is in charge of administering and enforcing the laws that impact feral cats. But I also thought an interesting point too for the ordinance was that the sponsorship, the names and the addresses of the feral cat caretakers are kept with the sponsors, and that was intentional. That was important because a lot of times people are a bit reluctant to have all of their personal information publicly searchable, and there is a fear for people who might want to harm the colonies that that this information at least be protected, the locations with the sponsor organization, and then only if an issue comes up, then you would have to get more of the public enforcement agencies involved. But I'll turn that back to Lisa. Thank you.
So as Anna mentioned, we're really fortunate to have this ordinance in Cook County that provides these various protections not only for the community cats but also for the people who are caretakers and caring for them. With regards to some of the other sections that are important of the Cook County ordinance. Another one is Section 10-97, which relates to the disposition of feral cats. And it's that Chicago Animal Control must scan ear tip cats for a microchip and contact the sponsor, and then the caretaker has the ability to, or must, reclaim their cat within 3 days. Another section that's important is 10-98, which is the enforcement, and it's that animal control is the only entity that may destroy a feral cat. So harming a feral cat is otherwise unlawful, and that is throughout the state of Illinois and the United States. So that's an important thing to note. With regards to the ordinance, it was contested, and there is some litigation that surrounds the Cook County ordinance, including a case by the name of County of Cook versus Village of Bridgeview from 2009. Bridgeview essentially enacted an ordinance forbidding feral cat colonies and imposing a $500 per day fine. Cook County filed a complaint claiming that Bridgeview didn't have home rule or statutory authority to do this, and ultimately the court ruled in favor of Cook County, stating that addressing overpopulation and the spread of rabies transcends municipal boundaries. And the court also stated that pursuant to Illinois statute, a local government can impose stricter regulations but cannot ban feral colonies altogether. Bridgeview appealed and lost again in 2014. With regards to what's going on in Cook County, right now it is a model in terms of the state with regards to TNR. Some of the things that I mentioned earlier are that vaccinating for rabies is required for all TNR cats in Cook County, and there is an agency associated with any TNR group and any thereby caretaker. TNR is more cost effective. It costs about $185 per cat to be euthanized. In Cook County, which has the largest population of cats and dogs in Illinois, for the years prior to 2007, euthanizing the same approximately 500 every year was costing Cook County close to $1.5 million. We don't take anything from the Pet Population Fund, and Cook County does not take any state funding. These programs are being funded by the Humane Societies. The Humane Societies has spent over $3 million, and Cook County has saved $1.5 million per year, and that's not being spent on euthanization of community cats, which most people, if given that option, do not want these cats to be euthanized also. Chicago Animal Control's cat population has dwindled, and the number of cats has been reduced by approximately 20%, taking statistics from the executive director of CACC. Chicago Animal Control had about 5,846 stray cats enter the facility in 2013, and in 2016 it was down to 3,432. At Chicago Animal Control, stray cat euthanasia went from 1,336 in 2013, and it went down to 488 cats in 2016. Right now, there's about 1,836 colonies within Cook County, and these are colonies that exist. They are not being created, but the ordinance and the programs allowed under it are reducing the population of those community cats. And there's also a variety of programs that, some of us have seen or heard about on the news. It's working cat programs, which are just examples of cats being used for the purposes of rodent control. So those are some of the exciting things that are going on in Cook County.
Yeah, and as far as it kind of works in a natural, the ecosystem way of having the feral cat populations end up being the working cats for certain neighborhoods that have other populations out of control. So that does make a lot of sense. And I wanted to mention, too, from the Bridgeview case, the original case back in 2009, there was a great paragraph here from the judge in the first district. I believe it was, I'm going to say Judge Mason was the one. I got the case here. Yeah, Judge Mason had written the opinion, but made a really good reference to Dr. Donna Alexander, who is the veterinarian and administrator of the county's Animal and Rabies Control Department. Because even though we don't think of cats as usually is being a rabies vehicle, I mean, in the sense of that there's really not any kind of huge right, it's a negligible risk at this point. It is still something that the state takes a great interest in, and to keep that risk very negligible with cats. So this was one of the reasons that the county was in fact able to use use Cook County ordinance to trump the Bridgeview ordinance, which was simply seeking to ban TNR entirely. But what was interesting about what Dr. Alexander had testified to at her deposition was that the TNR programs had saved the county over $1.5 million, just as you mentioned, primarily resulting from having fewer feral cats to euthanize, which was a huge benefit to the taxpayers. So the village of Bridgeview really wasn't able to then, say that the county wouldn't be impacted by their refusal to allow TNR. But I thought that, those were really good points. But yeah, as far as Cook County and in our ordinance so far, knock on wood, it's been going well, and it has been a great model. But now we'll try to find out how the rest of the the nation's doing with Richard.
Yep, and hello, and thanks for tuning in. I just want, like Anna mentioned, I work for Best Friends Animal Society. I work with programs like the one in Cook County here all across the country. So part of my job is to work with municipalities nationwide to be able to implement programs kind of like what's going on in Cook County or some variation of those types of programs. Whole lot of considerations going into them from a legal perspective. That's where I come in. I just deal with the legal perspectives most of the time. And as you heard from what Lisa was saying, a lot of this is melding state and local laws together to try and come up with the best programs available so that you're keeping community cats, feral cats, out of the shelters and living and limiting their numbers as best as we possibly can. First off, we talked a lot about TNR, trap, neuter, return. Lisa did. I sometimes called it TNVR, trap, neuter, vaccinate, return, just to emphasize that vaccinate for the health aspect on occasion. But another term I'm going to throw out there that Best Friends utilizes quite a bit is return to field, and that is more of an animal shelter-based program where cats that are impounded by local municipal shelters are actually returned. Go through the same process essentially as TNR. They are neutered, spayed, vaccinated, and the most important thing, and we kind of touched on it, is they're returned to the place where they were found. They are returned to only an alternate location, only if every other option has been exhausted. And one of the reasons this is so important, a lot of people try to create policies, shelter policies, based upon dogs, on what dogs do. And cats are very, very different than dogs. A lot of people, if you lose your dog, you go to the local shelter looking for your dog. If people who let their cats out or might not be able to see, might not find their cat for a couple of days, they don't generally go to the shelter looking for their cats. In fact, less than 2% of cats that enter shelters nationwide are reclaimed by their owners. Cats are 3 times more likely to disappear from their households because of indoor-outdoor access or wandering, whatever that might be. And however, they are 13 times more likely to return home all by themselves, by non-shelter means. So that is one of the reasons that the return in trap, neuter, return, or return to field is so very, very important. It is not release. Those cats, if you put them back where you found them, after, of course, vaccinating and sterilizing those cats, they will more than likely go home all by themselves. These considerations help. I try to work on both the legal aspects and the public policy aspects in these programs nationwide. And really, public policy-wise, there have been 2 approaches in the past to reduce the populations of community cats. One of those we're talking about. The good one, as far as I'm concerned, intensive TNR efforts, which includes both focused efforts like trapping in very, very focused areas, or shelter-based return to field, which I just mentioned. And the second approach, obviously, is what many people call the traditional approach, quote unquote, which is basically complaint-driven impoundment by the shelters, which bring the cat into the shelters. And typically, in most cases, that's going to result in the death of that cat. The majority of cats, in fact, it's a great majority of cats that are impounded by shelters nationwide, are killed. So we try to get these programs put into place nationwide so that we can actually decrease the numbers and save these cats' lives. It's twofold. It's a benefit for both sides. Best Friends actually commissioned a study in 2014. It was 3 questions that we asked respondents to this poll, and essentially we gave them 3 options as far as how to manage community cats. First was to sterilize, vaccinate, and return them back where they were captured. The second option was impoundment by shelter staff, followed by lethal injection for cats that were not adopted, or do nothing and leave the cats alone and let them fend for themselves. The results were not really surprising to myself or many of the people sitting in this room. The public strongly, strongly opposes lethal roundups of community cats. In fact, 68% of the people responding to that survey preferred the TNR, return to field method. 8% of the people said leave the cats alone and let them fend for themselves. What that tells us is a little over 75% of the people responding to that survey did not want the cats killed. They strongly, strongly oppose lethal roundups of cats, especially if it's your shelter's means of population control in your locality. So the public really, really wants these programs to work and definitely do not want to see cats entering shelters only to be put down. When I am going around with my colleagues around the country working with different municipalities, whether it be local municipalities or on occasion we are working with at the state level on state legislation, and we'll get to that too because we're working on some exciting stuff in Illinois. Before we get to that, there are certain things that we like to look at. There are hot button issues that we take a look at. If there's an ordinance in place in a locality, is there one in place is the first question. If there is, what are we looking at? And Lisa mentioned the absolute most important one. The first one we go to is the definition of owner. In Illinois, you guys have great, great definition terms throughout your state statutes as well as your local municipality, especially here in Cook County. And the implications that arise from utilizing the definition of owner, it runs the whole gamut. It protects basically what you're looking at. It could have implications on criminal statutes as far as care of your animals. It could also touch on, do caretakers have to license their animals? Do they have to keep your animals not running at large? All of these types of issues flow from the definition of owner and how it is read and how it is interpreted either in a local municipality or at the state level, depending upon which one controls in the area. The other things that we like to look at are stray hold periods. Stray hold periods are generally for shelters and municipalities holding an animal that might come into their facility, allowing people to be able to find their lost pets. As I mentioned earlier, cats are not dogs, and a lot of people do not come in to find their animals or cats during a stray hold period. So with the programs that we have with trap, neuter, vaccinate, return, or return to field, we strongly, strongly encourage definitely a 0 hold time, so we don't have to hold cats for any period of time before they are sterilized and put back. But if we can't convince people of that, because that's best case scenario, as short as very possible, minimal, so a day or two at the very, very most. Other things that we look at when we're looking at the ordinances and statutes are nuisance provisions. Obviously, a lot of the traditional approach that is used by shelters as far as impounding cats, they flow from nuisance provisions. Cats are getting into people's gardens and digging them up, or they are howling at night. Those sorts of things. I should mention at this point in time that just putting cats through a trap, neuter, return program solves many, many, many of the issues that come up as far as complaints regarding nuisances of cats. The howling, the wandering, those types of things are cured a lot of times simply by sterilizing the animal. I should also mention that the Illinois Animal Control Act has a great owner definition in that it specifically excludes a feral cat caretaker, just like the Cook County Ordinance. So anybody being controlled by the Animal Control Act in municipalities, if they choose to use the state statute, feral cat caretakers are not included in that definition of an owner, which is a great, great thing. It's one of the few states that actually do that. Other provisions that we look at large provisions, we want to make sure that community cats, feral cats are exempt and their caretakers are exempt from any at-large provisions, because it could potentially lead to civil and criminal penalties for those caretakers for having their quote-unquote cats at large. We already talked about the stray holds. One of the things I want to mention also is there are states that actually regulate, have put into place statutes for community cats. One of the best ones out there is the Utah Community Cat Act. It was put in place in 2011. We call it kind of a broad brush approach. When they basically have created, it's a very simple one-page statute essentially that exempts community cats from licensing requirements, any feeding bans that local municipalities might put into place saying that you cannot feed cats, and hopefully they'll go away. And also that very same statute also includes exemptions from the mandatory 5-day stray hold period. Those are the types of things we look for in local ordinances all of the time, and this is at the state level, so it's controlling, and it also provides guidance to the local municipalities if they ever want to implement their own ordinance in Utah. I say it all the time, don't try to recreate the wheel. There's great language there, and that's what a lot of municipalities, including Cook County in Illinois, have done, is copied some of the great language at the state level. So one of the other things I do is follow state legislation nationwide that might affect community cats, and what I have done is just kind of picked out a few of the ones from this legislative session that we're following and or working on directly. And since this is for the Illinois State Bar, I want to start with Illinois Senate Bill 641. We do. Best Friends has issued an action alert on this bill to all of our supporters who have subscribed to our action alerts. If I'm going to put in a shameless plug here, but bestfriends.org/action. You go to that, sign up for our legislative alerts, and we will send you alerts on anything that we are working on, legislation focusing on any companion animals, not just kitties, in the state of Illinois or in the locale that you're working, because we do have some other things that we're working on, not just community cats in Illinois as well. But Senate Bill 641, that is a very, very simple bill that allows counties within the state of Illinois to use certain pet population funds that they collect. They can use those funds to essentially for trap, neuter, vaccinate, return, as well as to allow people on Social Security disability to get their owned pets fixed at a discounted rate, obviously. Currently, the state of Illinois is allowed to use these same funds for the purposes that I just mentioned. Counties, for whatever reason within the statute, are not allowed to use the funds if they retain them for that purpose. So all Senate Bill 641 does is essentially level the playing field, because if I'm not mistaken, I believe only 5 counties in the state of Illinois send those funds to the state. So the vast majority of the counties in your state are holding on to these funds, wanting to be able to use them for different, whatever might be affecting them in their localities, and they can't do so at this point in time. So Senate Bill 641 essentially will level the playing field for that. It is just got through, I believe it was 3 weeks ago, through the Senate committee. It is hopefully going to be voted upon this week on the Senate floor. So if you're hearing this before then, get in touch with your senator and tell him to support Senate Bill 641, move it on to the House. We really need this law in the state of Illinois. As has been mentioned a little bit earlier, state agencies such as the Department of Natural Resources have come out in opposition to bills just like Senate 641, as well as this bill itself. They have an actual policy against feral cats, the Department of Natural Resources, that is available. If anybody wants it, I can certainly provide it, but essentially they say trap, neuter, return should not be taking place anywhere within the state of Illinois. Now, that's all fine and wonderful, but the Department of Ag is the one who has jurisdiction over these types of issues. So the DNR can feel that way if they want to. However, their jurisdiction is kind of limited in dealing with that type of issue. So remember, your Department of Ag is the one that is going to have jurisdiction over this type of thing. Jumping to another state, Connecticut has a Senate Bill 832 that was introduced earlier this year, and they use the term Felidae, which is a scientific term for cats. Any cat, any Felidae, cannot be fed on any land in the state not owned by the state. When we think about that, that means in your own backyard you cannot feed feral cats, community cats. You can't put food out for your own outdoor cat. This bill actually was introduced this year. It went and had a hearing in committee. Obviously, there was a lot of opposition to the bill from folks on my side. Best Friends actually submitted written testimony, and that bill was held in the committee at this point in time, but still could possibly make it out before the end of the term. So we're watching that. But that's one of the methods, I guess the end-around methods that people who oppose trap, neuter, return and return to field type programs use to try to limit or eliminate the programs without actually coming out and saying just no trap, neuter, return. This is an end around that by basically saying we can criminalize feeding of animals in your backyard. A good bill that is going on right now in Nevada is Senate Bill 411, and that bill was introduced about a month ago now. And essentially what that does is exempt feral cat caretakers who are participating in a trap, neuter, return or return to field program. It exempts them from abandonment of those cats during the return portion of their programs. There are some people within the state of Nevada who had tried to ticket caretakers previously for returning cats to where they were in order to try to get them to stop. So a coalition of some groups in Nevada put this bill together, found a wonderful senator to be able to run the bill, and Best Friends is definitely supporting. This bill, luckily, woohoo, has passed the Senate. It's sitting in the House committee and is hopefully going to have a hearing within the next couple of weeks to get through the House. I talk about how people try to end around the TNR programs, talk kind of out of the side of their mouth by trying to limit or eliminate these programs. And if there is a king of that process in our country, it is the state of Hawaii. They basically treat cats, feral cats, as an invasive species. If you go to their Invasive Species Council is what they call it within their Department of Land and Natural Resources, they actually list cats as an invasive species on their website. So this year there were no less than 59 different bills introduced in the state of Hawaii dealing with quote-unquote invasive species. and Best Friends, as well as Alley Cat Allies and other national organizations, have been fighting the good fight with these bills. But it looks like some of them are actually going to get through, one of which could potentially be allowing county officials or their contractors to enter private property to eradicate invasive species, essentially which is including feral cats. So if they tell you to get rid of your feral cats, stop feeding them in your yard, and you say no or don't let them in there, they will be able to, under this bill, which is HB 606 in Hawaii, House Bill 606, and House Bill 904, they will be able to enter private property of Hawaiians to be able to take care of that situation. Hopefully, their session ends by the end of the week, so we're crossing our fingers and doubling up and hoping that we can defeat most of these bills, especially those. But when they introduce as many as they have, it's bound to have some of them actually get through. I want to jump real quick to some examples of trap, neuter, vaccinate, return successes in the country. One of which is, a good example is Randolph County, North Carolina. There were 6 sterilized colonies that were actually, they took a census, counted the cats essentially before they started the program, did some very focused trap, neuter, vaccinate, and return efforts. And they're within these colonies, these 6 colonies, there was a 36% average decrease in population within just the first 2 years after the program was instituted. 3 unsterilized colonies, basically they wanted a test case to compare it to. 3 unsterilized colonies in the area experienced an average 47% increase over that same period of time. Not only did they do a follow-up after the first 2 years, they did a 4-year follow-up. And 1 colony out of those 6 that were sterilized actually was reduced from 10 cats to 0. And a 7-year follow-up, a colony originally containing 10 cats had reduced to 1 cat. So when you hear that trap, neuter, return doesn't work from opponents, it actually does work. It might take some time, but as we've heard all the good benefits of trap, neuter, vaccinate, return programs, you see that they actually do work. I want to, again, kind of toot our horn a little bit because I wanted to talk about the Best Friends community cat programs, which are more return to field type based. And I want to talk about one of the ones. We've had them in Baltimore, Philadelphia, Columbus, Georgia, Salt Lake City, Pima County, Arizona. One that we had in Albuquerque, New Mexico, that was started in February of 2012. Since that time, in partnership with locals on the ground as well as PetSmart charities, we had 8,100 sterilized and vaccinated cats in that area through that program. More than 75% came from community calls, people calling Best Friends or local partners on the ground, and did not come from the shelter. Those cats never entered the shelter, which is the goal of these programs. Overall intake of cats and kittens at the shelter declined by 32% over that period of time. Euthanasia rate, the big one that we like to measure in my industry, dropped by 79% at that shelter since that program was taken in. And one of the biggest indications that we utilize as successes for these programs, intake of kittens under the age of 8 weeks dropped by almost 30% in that since the start of that program. So we really do see there are some great results when these programs are put into place and very focused, like in Cook County, where you see the money being saved and the population's decreasing as well. So I really wanted to bring that up before we run out of time. But also, I'm going to briefly touch on one of the federal legal challenges that has arisen in the past couple of years As we have heard, some the avian opponents, that was a very polite way of putting it that Anna did, have taken to utilizing the Federal Endangered Species Act to challenge some of these programs or to try to stop some of the programs. Usually it's only a threat to whatever agency that they're dealing with, but in the past year, in the state of New York, the Eastern District of New York, the American Bird Conservancy filed a federal lawsuit under the Endangered Species Act against the New York State Parks Office. And basically what it deals with a couple of colonies that are in place on Jones Beach Island. It's a barrier island at the southern part of New York. And there are managed colonies there. Parks Department allows private citizens to feed and spay, neuter, and vaccinate and return these animals to where they're at. On Jones Beach, however, is a threatened species, the piping plover, nests there during the summer months. And one of the biggest things that I want to make very, very clear here, because Lisa so brought up man-made problems is the biggest problem for the, I guess, killing of endangered species, birds, that kind of thing. When you hear Jones Beach, you're thinking, in this wonderful wildlife area. Take a look and go ahead and Google Jones Beach and see what they do there at the air show on May 31st. There are RVs driving up and down the beach. There are hundreds of thousands of people tramping up and down the beach. This is not your utopia sitting out in the middle of nowhere where these little birds come flying in all alone and do their nesting. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to see these birds harmed, but this is a very, very misplaced lawsuit.
So can I ask, just as a quick question, Richard, given all those environmental factors that do impact the avian community, or the avian, avians in any community, what proof do the people bringing these lawsuits to, claim that the cats are a threat to them? What do they use to show? Because I know probably Lisa's the same way, like from personal experience, that not every cat is a birder. It actually requires some level of agility that most cats don't have. Most of them can get rodents, but to be able to catch a bird requires quite a bit of skill. So I'm just wondering what kind of evidence they would have to show in these lawsuits that the cats are really the culprits.
Well, and for this particular lawsuit, that's actually a really good question, because they have absolutely no proof whatsoever that any of the cats have harmed any of the birds, let alone killed any of them. What they do have to prove under the ESA is what is called a take. And it's defined very broadly under the Endangered Species Act, and it's defined as harassing, harming, pursuing, hunting, shooting, wounding, killing, etc., or attempting to engage in that conduct. ABC, the American Bird Conservancy, has done nothing more than say it could happen. They're harassing, and these birds nest here, and the cats, just their mere presence on the beach, could affect the nesting possibilities for these ground nesting birds. They are ground nesting. However, the Parks Department does come around. There are special fences put up because there are fox, there are raccoons, there are other things that could get into these nests, and they do extraordinary efforts actually to fence off the areas to keep predators out. Unfortunately, this case did survive a motion to dismiss, and it is moving forward. It's right now in the discovery period. But like I said, at this point anyway, we're not involved best friends in the case, but again, ourselves, Alley Cat Allies, the ASPCA, Humane Society of the United States are all following this case very, very, very closely and watching to see what might happen, because it could have very drastic effects nationwide if something bad were to come out of this case. But as lawyers, we all know a motion to dismiss is a very difficult threshold to beat at the very beginning. Some of the, rhetoric in the opinion issued by the judge basically said, ABC, you better come up with something more than this. You made it past here, but you better come up with something more. So that is one thing to keep watching. It is like I said, the case name is American Bird Conservancy versus New York Office of Parks and Recreation. It's in the Eastern District of New York for those of you with PACER and want to take a look and are curious. One of the most exciting things I want to talk about right before I end is the reason I'm actually in Chicago. One of the reasons, other than to do this, is I was recently at the American Bar Association Animal Law Committee meetings over the weekend. And myself and some other very much smarter than I people put together an ABA resolution, American Bar Association resolution, that would help promote, I guess, basically what it will do. The resolution asks the American Bar Association to urge state, local, and other municipal legislative bodies and governmental agencies to interpret existing laws and policies in favor of the implementation of trap, neuter, vaccinate, return programs, and also to adopt laws and policies going forward that do the same thing. There is a lot of inconsistent legal treatment of these programs across the country, and because it's my job, I hear the same thing all the time, but arguments coming up against trap, neuter, vaccinate, return, and return to field programs, it's the same argument over and over, however, just simple variations in different places. But if this resolution were to be approved by the full American Bar Association, it would go a long way. It would have a hammer for advocates like myself, Anna and Lisa, to go around and use and say, hey, look, the American Bar Association promotes these programs, wants consistent treatment of these programs across the country. The exciting part is we got it through the first step this weekend. It was approved unanimously by the Tort Trial and Insurance Practice section, which is going to take it to the full ABA House of Delegates at the annual meeting in August of this year. If it gets approved there, it will be an adopted resolution of the American Bar Association. These resolutions have gone a long way to helping against, like, there was one for breed discrimination for pit bulls and other type dogs a little while ago, and that gets used and cited across the country in areas that are looking to introduce breed discriminatory legislation. So we want to be able to do the same thing with cats with this resolution, and the American Bar actually was very, very receptive to it. Like I said, it did pass unanimously this weekend, so we're looking forward to August and hoping that we can get this through at that point in time, and we'll certainly be providing copies of it to everybody who wants to be able to use it in their local communities across the country too. Okay, so that is about it for me. I think I did okay.
No, I think so too. I had a couple of questions for you guys, so just because we did have a little extra time. But I will say, with the ABA proposal, I would definitely love that. I hope it passes, because even in Illinois, there's been inconsistent treatment. Because right around the same time as the first of the Bridgeview cases, there were a lot of municipalities within Cook County really hesitating to allow the TNR to happen, and they were using many creative ways to go after the caretakers. One of which, I remember having a case in Hanover Park where they were accusing someone of having kennels in their yard. So what you would consider someone that's usually breeding and profiting, or breeding and doing something else, with their animals, they were charging the caretakers with that. Luckily, though, the judge did, in that case, did see that was really an unfair use of claiming somebody was having a kennel by harboring, if you will, animals at the time they were feeding them, and stated that would be really reading in another element to the ordinance that wasn't there in existence. So, it was just very interesting to see how these another way to work around, if you will, the ordinance. But it's really good to hear that that on appeal that the Bridgeview case was in fact upheld, and we're able to use that here. But I also, was hoping to find out a little bit more about, when you have to handle the like changes in the authorities in these particular areas, like with the lethal roundups, is when Lisa was talking and we mentioned the sponsorship and how the sponsors, at least in Cook County, are holding the names and the locations of these colonies. If you could explain, I guess maybe if you can, the importance of having animal control on your side versus not in what you may have experienced throughout the country.
Oh, we say one of the reasons we use the term community cats more so than feral cats is it takes a community, and animal control officers are part of that community. We cannot, our programs, our national programs would not be so successful. Our local trap, neuter, vaccinate, return programs would not be successful without the buy-in of local animal control officers. We have to have them on our side in order to have the best possible result for the program. So in fact, we do a lot of work with the National Animal Control Association, Animal Care and Control it's called now. So without their buy-in and their efforts working alongside ours, we wouldn't see some of the successes in the local programs. I mean, it's their choice. They're the ones enforcing these ordinances. Mm-hmm. So they have to be able to buy in and say, hey, we're right along with you. We don't want the cats in our facility either. We'd much rather use the money we're spending on them elsewhere to be able to use it for another officer or other enforcement measures.
Because that was an issue with the stray hold periods too. And I know Lisa was present for some of the discussions about that, because it was a bit controversial here when they were trying to shorten the stray hold periods, because there's a fear if your animal ends up at a shelter, or if they're maybe mistaken as a stray, understanding that not everyone has a microchip or not everyone got their animal microchipped, that they're worried then that by reducing that hold too much, that would essentially give animal control the right to kill any animals that aren't claimed right away. Luckily for us right now in Chicago, things are getting better, knock on wood, but things are taking a turn for the better, and we're hopefully going to have to worry about that less. But if there were a change in animal control, and maybe that's there is no stray hold there, the concern is that the feral cats would be taken and killed instantly, or that other people's cats would be taken and killed instantly if there was no hold. So how do you address that issue to protect the ferals, who arguably would be it may be better for them if they're facing a long hold period versus being killed. I mean, because it's terrifying. If you've ever seen one of the feral cats in the cages there, it's truly a horrific thing to watch, because they are not socialized. They do not know how to interact with humans. So I guess, how do you balance that with people that are raising the issue of the stray hold being a potential detriment for someone trying to reclaim their animal? Or the stray hold shortened time.
You're actually full of good questions today. So one of
I'm not sure Lisa would agree.
It's a great point, and one I neglected to actually address. The only way the stray holds are brought down to the minimum period or zero are if the cats are put into that program and into a return field program or trap, neuter, vaccinate, return. If the choice is not a positive outcome for those cats, or you're looking to adopt the cat out after the stray hold period, the stray hold period is going to apply. The only cats that are exempt are the ones that are on their way down the hall to the veterinarian to be spayed, neutered, vaccinated, and returned. And we make sure that some of the language, whether it be in the local ordinance or statutes, are read that way, or very, very clear. In fact, Arizona has a great, it's an okay statute, but we're working on one in Delaware actually promoting that one as well, where we're basically made it very, very clear. Stray hold is waived only for cats who are headed to that veterinarian for sterilization.
And my other question then was for the both of you, in dealing with, and I see Lisa's actually looking at a picture of one of her cats here. It's actually, but it's I don't know if you've ever had to do that before, but there are some situations where the cats are in danger. Like we've had feral cat colonies right next to a factory that's either going to be torn down, removed, or is right, unfortunately, next to a highway where the animals are unsafe. have you ever had to address that? And I guess have any of the municipalities mandated it? Because I know there was a situation we came very close to, in working with one of the caretakers and their sponsor, being mandated to relocate, or else they would do a lethal roundup. But have you ever addressed that or dealt with it in any way? And even if you haven't, what would your recommendations be to someone facing that situation? Oh, okay.
One, I've never personally had to address it myself. I know that it happens quite frequently. One of the ones that does come to mind that we were involved in was in a place called Seaside Heights, New Jersey last year. It's a boardwalk town. There were cats and had been cats there forever. And there was a new development going in right next to the boardwalk, and the little town decided they were going to remove the cats or kill them. So the local organizations took it upon themselves to relocate them to a different area away from the boardwalk, not so close so that those cats would be trying to find their way home. But they actually kept them in areas to be in essentially cages, large cages on the land to acclimate them for a period of time to the area as their quote-unquote new home. So, and most of the cats that got relocated are doing really, really well there, is my understanding. And it's only third-hand information, but, I've seen quite a few articles like that. It's obviously a last resort. But there are situations like that where either sanctuaries are had to be found, or a separate area needs to be found to acclimate those cats and let them live out their lives where they are in a different area for their own safety.
And just to touch on what Richard says, I've never had to been involved, or I've never been involved with that either, but I am aware of situations where people had to move them, or people moved and they couldn't find someone to care for their colony. And so there are some steps, and you could find a lot of resources that would explain how you do it. It'd be a very slow process, very slow process, and some of it is even just starting to move their feeding stations little by little, so that you sort of get them to go along with, moving to where they need to be relocated. If you're under a time crunch, then it's a little bit more difficult to do that. But with some time, it can be done. So it's just my 2 cents.
And we have a little bit of time left, so I wanted to ask the last question because, we are in the middle of kitten season. Or actually, no, we're just at the early start. Yeah, kind of, I shouldn't say early start. We're here. Kitten season is here. So this is something, it comes up a lot in the TNR community because something might happen, maybe to the feral cat mom, and there's kittens that need caring for, or people mistakenly think that it's a good idea to take a batch of kittens that they find to the local shelter because, something must have happened when the mom might actually still be alive. I know that the Cook County ordinance addresses that, and I'll turn it over to Lisa to answer that, because people listening may very well have that experience right now, because when you start TNR, it's not magical that all your cats get sterilized at the same time. Often it's a very long process of one by one. You sit out with the trap, you wait, you hope the cat goes in, you get some really stinky smelling food, and they'll go in eventually. But it's often not all at
Trap
once.
the same one over and over.
Yes. Trap the same one who's realized that, you will release them if they've already been neutered. But how to address, and how to deal with that in a way that is compliant with what we're doing is feral cat caretakers, but then also remembering that, if you have a batch of kittens, you don't want the colony to explode, which it could, because more often, if a cat's going to be accepted in the community and the colony that exists, it's going to be one that's born into it rather than one that would wander in, because the cats do tend to be territorial, and that's how vacuum effect works over time, is that, if there's, if the cats decrease in number slowly, eventually the food sources maybe will go away, and then they will just, that colony will be gone. But with the kittens, you could get an explosion, and that's kind of, you want to make sure that the colony numbers don't get too huge, because then that's when diseases can come out. Even though you get vaccinations, if, you have overpopulation, that's a problem. But for the kittens, what do you do?
If it's a situation where you've described where if you have resources and you could rehome those kittens, I think that if you can get a community cat that's 12 weeks or under, pretty easily socializable. And, I have 2 of those types. They came into my house. I brought them in under 12 weeks, and they are the sweetest cats ever. So that's one option.
Cool. And I guess, Richard, do you know if there's any efforts for providing resources to people doing that that are ultimately having to socialize the kittens born to feral cats at a certain point to prevent a massive explosion in, I guess, the colony population, or if there's any efforts towards that?
Well, we do it as a matter of course in fact, we believe that to be best practices for these types of programs, whether it be return to field, trap, neuter, return. You have to pull some of those to be able to get them into homes if they're sociable. As Lisa said, sometimes they're not, and you run them through the program if you can, because they're going to be far better off out there than they will be dead, is our feeling. But these are all intertwined. A lot of, when I sit in meetings with like the Audubon Society and so forth, they say, well, why don't you adopt some of them out? I said, well, we do. That goes part and parcel with these things, to be able to pull the sociables, the young kittens like what you're talking about, out to hopefully find them new homes. And if you have less and less animals entering the shelters and taking up those resources, like in LA we have our kitten nursery where we set it up in the city of LA, and it's one of the tools in your tool chest that you can be able to use. It's very expensive, but once you start taking away the population that's entering the shelter, you can have resources like that within your shelter. You can reallocate the money that you save, not spending on, $1.5 million you've saved in Cook County over that period of time. That's absolutely amazing. Take a little bit of that money and have a kitten nursery.
And I do some of the work that I do with Spay and Stay, which is in Lake County where I live. And for example, they do that as well. Caretakers, when they have kittens, they bring them in, they get fostered, and they end up, at your local Petco or PetSmart, available for adoption. And so it's not always necessarily as fancy as a kitten nursery, but it is the foster parents sitting in various different pet-friendly stores trying to find homes for the kittens.
That sounds great. I mean, because with the statistics Lisa mentioned and how things are going better, here locally in Chicago, fingers crossed, we'll be able. I don't know if we'll ever have a kitten nursery. That sounds amazing.
I know.
but at least we're moving in the right direction, I think so. That's hopeful, and I think that's it. We're almost out of time, so I want to say to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed today's discussion of feral cats, and we hope to have you as part of our listening audience for future ISBA Animal Law podcasts. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you, Richard. And
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Anna.
Thanks so much, everybody.